First contact, first blood. The Exenary Empire stretched across 17 star systems, their sleek crystalline ships a common sight among the celestial lanes they had claimed as their own. For 3 centuries, they had been the undisputed masters of this sector of the galaxy. Their technology was unmatched, their military might unchallenged, and their hunger for expansion insatiable. Commander Fallon stood on the observation deck of the Dominion, the flagship of the Exenary fleet. His 6-fingered hands clasped behind his back, the bioluminescent patterns on his gray skin pulsing with contemplation. The vast emptiness of space stretched before him, dotted with stars that belonged to the Empire. It was a view he never tired of, a constant reminder of Exenary's superiority. "Commander," a voice interrupted his thoughts. "We've detected something unusual." Fallon turned to face Lieutenant Miva, whose facial ridges were furrowed with concern. "Define unusual, Lieutenant." "A series of signals originating from the outer rim, sir. They don't match any known communication protocols in our database." Fallon's secondary eyelids blinked rapidly, a sign of mild interest but not alarm. The outer rim was barely worth the Empire's attention, a scattering of undeveloped systems with negligible resources. Forward the data to analysis. Probably just cosmic interference or some primitive species discovering radio waves, he said dismissively. Miva hesitated. "Sir, there's more. The signals, they're structured, too precise to be natural, and they're moving." Moving. This caught Fallon's attention. "Explain." "The source is approaching our territory, sir, rapidly." In the command center of the Dominion, the senior officers gathered around the holographic display. The signals appeared as pulsing red dots, advancing steadily toward the edge of Exenary space. Admiral Zenith, the highest-ranking officer on board, studied the display with narrowed eyes. Her crest, a sign of her noble lineage, flared slightly with irritation. "Have we established any visual confirmation?" she asked. "Negative, Admiral," replied the sensor officer. "Whatever they are, they're maintaining a stealth profile that's remarkably effective against our long-range scanners." "Could it be the Vextar?" suggested another officer. "They've been causing trouble along the eastern boundary." Admiral Zenith shook her head. "The Vextar don't have this level of technology. Their ships are primitive. We would have detected them long before now." "What about the Coalition?" offered Fallon. "They've been unusually quiet lately." "Possible, but unlikely," said Zenith. "This doesn't match their typical approach. The Coalition announces their presence. They don't sneak around." The room fell silent, the implications hanging in the air. An unknown force was approaching, one that possibly possessed technology sophisticated enough to challenge Exenary supremacy. "Deploy reconnaissance drones," ordered Zenith finally. "I want eyes on whatever this is, and alert the defensive outposts along the perimeter. Standard caution protocols: observe but do not engage unless threatened." 12 hours later, the reconnaissance drones sent back their first images, and the command center of the Dominion fell deathly quiet. Ships, dozens of them, but unlike anything the Exenary had ever seen. Where Exenary vessels were elegant and crystalline, these were industrial, utilitarian, all sharp angles and exposed metal. They bore none of the ornamental flourishes that distinguished the various species of the known galaxy. They were, in a word, alien. What are they?" whispered Miva, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Admiral Zenith stepped closer to the display, her expression unreadable. "I don't know, but whatever they are, they're approaching our territory with what appears to be a military formation." "Shall I ready our forces, Admiral?" asked Fallon, his hand already reaching for the communication panel. Zenith raised a hand, stopping him. "Not yet. Let's see what they want first. Hail them." The communications officer attempted to establish contact using every protocol in the Exenary database. Minutes stretched into hours with no response. "They're ignoring us," said Fallon, indignation creeping into his voice. Or they don't understand our methods of communication, countered Zenith. Continue monitoring them. If they cross the boundary into our space without responding to our hails, then we'll consider it a hostile action. It was another 8 hours before the mysterious fleet reached the edge of Cenari territory. The boundary wasn't marked by any physical barrier, just a line on star charts that delineated where Cenari authority began. Yet, as the lead ship of the unknown fleet approached that invisible line, it paused. Then, without warning, a transmission burst across all Cenari communication channels. It was unlike any language they had encountered, harsh, staccato sounds that their translation matrices struggled to interpret. After several tense minutes, the computers produced a rough translation. Attention, Cenari Empire. This is Captain Eleanor Chen of the Earth Defense Force. You have invaded and colonized worlds that were under human protection. We demand immediate withdrawal from all contested systems and reparations for the indigenous species you have displaced. You have 24 hours to respond before we take action. The command center erupted in disbelief and outrage. Humans? What are humans? Demands. They dare to make demands of the Empire. Indigenous species. Those were primitive creatures barely worth studying. Admiral Zenith silenced them with a gesture. Her expression had hardened, the professional curiosity replaced by cold calculation. Send a message to High Command. We've encountered a previously unknown species calling themselves humans. They are making territorial claims and threats. She paused, considering her next words carefully. Recommend we respond with a show of force to establish proper hierarchy. High Command's response came swiftly. Proceed with standard protocol for species integration. If they resist, demonstrate Cenari superiority. Standard protocol was clear, a display of Cenari military might, followed by offers of protection in exchange for submission. It had worked countless times before. Admiral Zenith dispatched 5 warships, a formidable greeting party that would make the Empire's position clear without committing the full fleet. The ships, sleek and gleaming in the starlight, moved into formation and advanced toward the human vessels. From the command center of the Dominion, Fallon watched with satisfaction. The humans would soon learn their place in the galactic order. But as the Cenari warships approached, something unexpected happened. The human vessels, previously stationary, began to move with startling precision. They spread out in a pattern that made no strategic sense to Cenari military doctrine, until the first shots were fired. The lead Cenari warship fired a warning volley, a standard intimidation tactic. The energy beams should have dissipated harmlessly against the human shields, demonstrating Cenari weapon superiority without causing actual damage. Instead, the human ships seemed to anticipate the move. They shifted positions microseconds before the beams were fired, causing the shots to miss entirely. Then, with no hesitation, they returned fire. What happened next would be recorded in Cenari military archives as the first contact disaster. The human weapons, projectile-based rather than energy-based, tore through Cenari shields as if they weren't there. The first warship was disabled within seconds, its crystalline structure shattered by the impact of physical munitions, a primitive approach that Cenari had abandoned centuries ago, and thus had no defenses against. Impossible, shouted Fallon, watching in horror as a second Cenari ship was crippled, then a third. Admiral Zenith's face was ashen, her crest flattened against her skull in shock. Full retreat, she ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, louder. FUL or ETR-E8. All ships disengage and return to defensive positions. But it was too late. The remaining Cenari ships attempted to withdraw, but the humans pursued with relentless efficiency. Within minutes, all 5 warships had been disabled or destroyed. As the command center of the Dominion descended into chaos, another transmission came through. This was a warning. Your 24 hours begin now. Admiral Zenith stood frozen, staring at the display where the dots representing her ships had winked out one by one. In 3 centuries of Xenari expansion, they had never encountered a species that could stand against them, let alone defeat them so thoroughly. What do we do?" asked Fallon, his voice uncharacteristically small. Zenith turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the cold reality of their situation. "We prepare for war, Commander. A war unlike any the Empire has ever faced." As the Dominion rallied the rest of the fleet, reports began pouring in from across the sector. More human ships had been detected approaching from multiple vectors. This wasn't just a skirmish force, it was an invasion fleet. The humans were coming, and the Xenari Empire, for the first time in its history, was afraid. Turning the tide. The Xenari High Council chamber was in an uproar. Emergency protocols had been activated across all 17 systems as reports of the human fleet's advancement continued to flood in. The crystalline walls, normally shimmering with calm blue light, now pulsed an alarming red. Supreme Counselor Vexal, the eldest member of the council and a veteran of the early expansion wars, struck his ceremonial staff against the floor. The sound echoed through the chamber, bringing the chaotic discussion to an abrupt halt. "In all my cycles, I have never seen such a display of panic from the leadership of our great empire," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "This human species has won a single engagement, and you speak as if the empire is already fallen." Admiral Zenith, who had been recalled from the Dominion to brief the council directly, stepped forward. "With respect, Supreme Counselor, it was not just a single engagement. In the past 12 hours, humans have disabled or destroyed 15 of our warships across 3 star systems. They breached our defenses with minimal casualties on their side." She paused, letting the information sink in. "They are not following any battle doctrine we recognize. Their technology is unexpected." "Explain," demanded Vexal. "Their ships are armored in ways we thought inefficient, layers of physical barriers rather than energy shields. They use kinetic weapons, actual projectiles, alongside energy-based systems, and—" She hesitated. "They seem to anticipate our maneuvers before we execute them." A murmur rippled through the council. "Are you suggesting they have precognitive abilities?" asked another counselor. Zenith shook her head. "No, I think they've been watching us for a long time, studying our tactics, our technology. This isn't a spontaneous encounter. They've been preparing for this confrontation." The revelation sent another wave of unease through the chamber. The idea that an unknown species had been observing them, planning against them, was deeply disturbing to the Xenari, who had long considered themselves the most advanced civilization in known space. "What do they want?" asked Vexal. "They claim we've colonized worlds under their protection and demand immediate withdrawal, along with reparations for indigenous species," replied Zenith. Vexal's expression darkened. "Protection? They weren't there when we arrived. No signs of advanced civilization, no territorial markers, just primitive life forms." "Perhaps that was intentional," suggested Zenith. "Perhaps they wanted to see what we would do without their presence." The implications hung heavy in the air. If the humans had been watching all along, then every Xenari action had been observed, judged, and potentially used to develop countermeasures. "What are our options?" asked Vexal finally. "We have 3 choices," said Zenith. "First, we can attempt to negotiate, though their initial communication suggests they're not interested in compromise. Second, we can withdraw from the contested systems as demanded, which would be an unprecedented concession for the Empire. Or third, we commit our full military might and attempt to crush them before they can establish a foothold in our territory." The council chamber fell silent as the options were considered. Negotiation was foreign to Xenari diplomacy. They dictated terms. They didn't discuss them. Withdrawal was unthinkable. It would signal weakness to other species in the galaxy. But a full-scale war against an enemy with unknown capabilities was equally concerning. "We are the Xenari Empire," said Vexal, breaking the silence. "We do not bend to the will of lesser species. Prepare the armada. We will show these humans the true might of the Empire. The decision was made. Within hours, the Exenary Armada, 200 warships strong, assembled at the edge of the contested space. It was the largest military force the Empire had ever deployed at once, a display of power meant to overwhelm and intimidate. From the command bridge of the Dominion, now positioned at the center of the Exenary formation, Admiral Zenith watched as the final preparations were completed. Despite the overwhelming force at her disposal, a sense of unease lingered. "All ships report ready, Admiral," announced Commander Fallon. Zenith nodded. "Send the following message to the human fleet. The Exenary Empire does not recognize your claims. Withdraw immediately or face annihilation." As the message was transmitted, the sensor officer suddenly straightened in alarm. "Admiral, multiple hyperspace signatures detected on approach." "The human fleet?" asked Zenith. "Yes, but," the officer faltered, "they're not where we expected. They're coming from behind us." Behind. Zenith spun to face the tactical display. Sure enough, human ships were emerging from hyperspace at their rear, cutting off their retreat path. How did they? She didn't finish the thought. Reorient the fleet. Prepare for engagement from multiple vectors. But before the Exenary Armada could fully adjust their position, another wave of human ships appeared to their starboard, and then another to port. They were being surrounded. "This is impossible," whispered Fallon. "They couldn't have known our position. We've been using encrypted channels, changing frequencies. They've been watching us longer than we thought," said Zenith grimly. "They know how we think, how we fight." As the human ships closed in, Zenith noticed something odd about their formation. They weren't positioned to maximize firing arcs as Exenary doctrine would dictate. Instead, they seemed to be clustering in unusual patterns, leaving deliberate gaps in their formation. "It's a trap," she realized suddenly. "They want us to target those gaps, to concentrate our fire there." She turned to Fallon. "Order the fleet not to engage the weak points in their formation. It's where they want us to attack." But the order came too late. Several Exenary captains, seeing the apparent vulnerabilities, had already directed their ships to exploit them. As their weapons' fire streaked toward the gaps in the human formation, the human ships suddenly accelerated, closing the openings and revealing smaller vessels that had been concealed behind them. These newly revealed ships darted forward with incredible speed, reaching the Exenary vessels before they could adjust their targeting. They were clearly designed for close-range combat, attaching themselves to the larger Exenary warships like parasites. "What are they doing?" asked Fallon, watching in horror as the small human ships latched onto Exenary vessels throughout the fleet. The answer came moments later as explosions rippled across multiple Exenary warships. The human craft weren't just attaching. They were breaching the hulls. "They're boarding us," said Zenith in disbelief. "They're sending troops directly into our ships." It was a tactic so archaic, so primitive by Exenary standards, that it had never been considered a serious threat. Exenary warfare had evolved beyond physical confrontation centuries ago. Their ships weren't designed to repel boarders, and their crews weren't trained for close-quarters combat. "All ships, initiate emergency protocols. Seal all compartments," ordered Zenith, but she knew it was futile. The Exenary weren't prepared for this kind of warfare. Reports began flooding in from across the fleet. Human soldiers, encased in armored suits that seemed to enhance their natural strength, were systematically taking control of Exenary vessels from within. They moved with a coordination and efficiency that suggested extensive training for exactly this scenario. On the tactical display, Zenith watched as Exenary ship after Exenary ship stopped responding to commands. They weren't being destroyed. They were being captured. "Admiral," said Fallon quietly, "we're losing." Zenith stared at the display, her mind racing. The humans had outmaneuvered them at every turn, using strategies that Exenary had never considered. They had studied their enemy, prepared specifically to counter Exenary strengths and exploit Exenary weaknesses. "Send a message to High Command," she said finally. "Request immediate authorization for strategic withdrawal." Fallon's eyes widened. In all of Xenari military history, no admiral had ever requested permission to retreat from battle. "Are you certain, Admiral?" Zenith met his gaze steadily. "If we stay, we lose the entire armada. If we withdraw, we can regroup, develop new strategies. The Empire cannot afford to lose its fleet in a single engagement." As Fallon relayed the request, Zenith turned her attention back to the battle. The humans were not pursuing total destruction. They were disabling and capturing. It was a deliberate choice, and it told her something important about their intentions. "They want something specific," she murmured. "This isn't about annihilation. They want the contested systems. Yes, but there's more." Before she could pursue the thought further, Fallon returned. "High Command has authorized withdrawal, Admiral. He hesitated. "They request your presence at an emergency council session upon return." Zenith nodded. She had expected as much. Failure was not tolerated in the Xenari hierarchy, regardless of the circumstances. Signal the remaining ships, fall back to designated coordinates, and, she paused, prepare a direct communication channel to the human command. "Admiral, if they wanted us destroyed, we would be all ready. They're sending a message. I intend to hear what it is." As the surviving Xenari ships broke formation and began their retreat, a transmission came through from the human fleet. "Admiral Zenith, this is Fleet Admiral Helena Chen of the Earth Defense Force. Your withdrawal has been noted. Be advised. The systems you know as Sector 7, 9, and 12 are now under human protection. Any Xenari incursion into these systems will be met with immediate force. Additionally, we require your presence at coordinates we are transmitting now for diplomatic discussions regarding the indigenous species of these systems and the terms of our future relations. You have 48 hours to respond." The message was clear, direct, and left no room for negotiation. Exactly the kind of communication the Xenari themselves favored. "They know me by name," said Zenith quietly. "They've been watching us very carefully indeed." As the Dominion led the retreat back to Xenari space, Zenith stood alone on the observation deck, watching the stars streak by. The Empire had suffered its first significant defeat in centuries, and the repercussions would be felt across all 17 systems. But what troubled her most wasn't the defeat itself. It was the realization that there was an entire civilization out there, one with capabilities that matched or exceeded their own, that had remained hidden until they chose to reveal themselves. The humans hadn't stumbled upon the Xenari Empire by chance. They had waited, watched, and prepared. And then, when they were ready, they had struck with precision and purpose. As the Dominion approached Xenari Prime, Zenith made a decision. She would face the High Council, accept whatever punishment they deemed appropriate. But she would also advocate for something the Empire had never considered before: genuine diplomacy. Because the alternative was clear. The humans had proven they could defeat the Xenari in battle. If pushed, they might not stop at reclaiming a few contested systems. They might decide that the Xenari Empire itself was a threat that needed to be eliminated. And based on what she had witnessed, Zenith believed they were entirely capable of doing so. The age of unchallenged Xenari dominance was over. A new era had begun, one where humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy in the most emphatic way possible. The humans had arrived, and they were ready for battle. But perhaps, Zenith thought, they might also be ready for peace, on their terms. Only time would tell which path the stars would favor.